Wilson, BBC News, at the Department of Health.
President Kaba of Sierra Leone has declared an immediate 7-day ceasefire in an attempt to end the latest outbreak of civil war there. Rebels from the military regime that he removed from power with British help last year have entered the capital, Freetown. President Kaba's offered to release their leader from prison, but the rebels say they won't agree to a truce until he's actually set free.
It was as United Nations personnel hurried to leave Sierra Leone yesterday that it became obvious the situation there was deteriorating rapidly. While they were leaving, rebels were pushing their way into the centre of the capital, storming 2 prisons and forcing President Kaba and his government to take shelter in the airport. By this morning, the city was effectively divided. West African forces, led by Nigerian troops, were once again fighting to try to keep Sierra Leone's democratically elected president in office. It was only last February that they evicted rebels from Sierra Leone's capital to restore President Kaba to power last time. Only 2 years since he first took elected office, President Kaba is again in trouble. And in the cyclical world of war and peace in Sierra Leone, the truce, now apparently offered to his opponents, is an echo of the peace deal he signed 2 years ago with the rebel leader Fode Sanko, then an honoured guest, now in prison facing the death penalty. The problem is, until he's released, rebels now holding part of the capital don't seem interested in a truce. For Britain, though, the once colonial power who's led the international effort to shore up President Kaba, even at the cost of the embarrassing Arms for Sierra Leone affair, any talk of a peace deal is a cause for optimism. In Brussels today, the Foreign Secretary made clear he'll keep pressing for negotiations.
It is for President Kaba to decide what might be acceptable terms of the truce. The important objective is that they must provide for disarmament, demobilization of the different armed groups within Sierra Leone outside the government. And Britain is ready to help with the cost of that demobilization.
It's hardly surprising Britain is worried about what's happening. It's invested £30 million in Sierra Leone in the last 9 months. Just this Tuesday, the Foreign Office announced a further £1 million in aid in a desperate attempt to keep President Kaba in office, all of which could prove in vain if his fragile democratic government is being ousted. Bridget Kendall, BBC News at the Foreign Office.
A 25-year study into the effects of the contraceptive pill has concluded that there are no long-term health risks once women stop using it. 46,000 women surveyed for 10 years after they stopped taking the pill had the same death rates as women who had never used it. There had been worries that the contraceptive pill increased the risk of cancer in later life. The number of motorists found to have been drinking and driving over Christmas in England and Wales was 22% down on last year. In Scotland, slightly more drivers tested positive than last year, but there were fewer alcohol-related accidents. In Northern Ireland, 1 in 10 drivers breathalyzed was over the legal limit. There are fears of a new refugee crisis in Kosovo, with the growing prospect of more fighting between the Kosovan Liberation Army and the Serbs. Kosovo is the southwestern province of Serbia. Most of its population are of Albanian descent and want a greater degree of political autonomy. In last year's fighting between the Serbs and the Kosovo Liberation Army, 250,000 ethnic Albanian refugees fled their homes and hid in the hillsides. Many returned in the autumn after an uneasy truce. Our special correspondent Ben Brown reports now from Kosovo on the fears of a new refugee crisis.
None of the refugees who were hiding in the hills and the mountains of Kosovo are up here any longer. The uneasy truce means they have been able to go back to their villages, but they know their ordeal may not be over.
Jasha Mule is putting new windows into the home the Serbs burned down, a home where there is still snow in the living room because he's only just rebuilt the roof with some of the international aid money donated to Kosovo. The trouble is that Jasha fears the Serbs may be back before too long.
I'm afraid things are not getting any better. We're not safe, and we have no guarantee that what we have just rebuilt won't be destroyed all over again.
But Jasha is lucky compared to the Rahmani family, who also came back to their house to find it burned down. But in their case, no one's helping them rebuild it. So now they're staying across the yard in a tiny cowshed, their new home. 3 generations of the Rahmanis, 12 people in all, who have no choice but to live where their cattle used to, Not surprisingly, they feel utterly humiliated. Inside the cowshed, the Rahmani children help each other learn to read. They're too scared to go to school today. There's sporadic shooting outside. These people were refugees for 3 months last year. They say life is little better for them now, even though they're back in their village.
This is no life. Can you imagine living like this? It's like we're dead. We have no food, no drink, no clothes. They burned everything we had. I never dreamed I would have to live like this.
Aid workers are a vital lifeline for families like the Rahmanis who live in one of the remotest parts of Kosovo.
I mean, living in a stable is not a normal place to live in. They would need clothing and food, and on a regular basis they would need medical treatment on a regular basis, but beyond all they would need peace and tranquility.
But there's been precious little sign of that. Whenever fresh fighting flares up here, as it did over Christmas, thousands more people are suddenly made homeless. In this case, around the town of Podjeva, not only ethnic Albanians, but also Serbs. There are innocent victims on both sides of the Kosovo tragedy.